I'm sure you probably realised already, extremely complicated. And I think often we're looking for quite simplistic measures in a very complicated thing. So what I'll be talking about today, some of it's kind of at a whole school level, some of it's at an individual level, and crucially, for it to be effective, those two need to be kind of feeding into one another. So, for those of you who haven't met before, my name is Bridget, and I work for the Teacher Development Trust. So we're a charity that was set up about 4 years ago to look at improving the quality of CPD in schools. So we work with providers of education and also schools themselves in terms of how they facilitate and structure it. So we've kind of had some examples already, and we use these pens. Jason, you mentioned the current evaluating system that's there is just, did you enjoy it? Is that fair? Is that
I'm being a little bit facetious, but it is basically like, did you think it was useful, was it well delivered? Which broadly has everyone going, oh yes, I did really like it.
Yeah.
Doesn't tell you anything meaningful, and there is certainly at the moment in the school I come from absolutely no tracking of whether or not our CPD achieves anything in terms of making our teaching better.
And what kind of like literacy? So is it a kind of informed people?
Basically, yeah. My predecessor was very keen on paper tracking of everything, but basically everyone gets a form, you fill in the form with a little ranked scale so that everyone liked their CPD, so therefore it's good.
3 to 4, yeah. Is that a similar experience for you two, or?
I think it used to be like that. I think it's going more. We probably still do a similar thing, but it ends up electronically recorded, I suspect, now rather than paper-based. But it's, it does tend to be a ranking system, so you know, and it would be similar categories, I suspect, or occasionally not done at all.
And how does it get followed up? Do you have a sense of how it's followed up? You might not know.
No, wouldn't be able to tell you.
And in terms of your role, what's the kind of systems you use?
Again, it's pretty hit and miss. My aim is far more not to get feedback on how useful, how enjoyable, or how good the lunch was, but much more before you leave the room, what's your first thought about what you're going to do with this?
Sorry, there's not significance to the colour, it's just, I thought it was quite interesting.
You know, what you're going to do with what you've done today, what is at least one action point, but then the difficulty then is how we actually go about following that up.
Yeah, and I think as an external provider, so earlier in the session this morning, leading effective CPD, the big thing is when you're looking to change practice, you need to sustain that over a period of time. There needs to be an iterative process where you might get some input, you try it out, you reflect on it, you evaluate and so on, and then you improve it over time. And I think for external partners that's really difficult, because often external partners want to be engaged in that process in some way, whether that's just by email or phone calls, or you know, ensuring in that evaluation process they can offer support. But normally that relationship isn't set up that way, and the school doesn't necessarily, or teachers don't necessarily go back to work with those. So from your point of view, it's very difficult to evaluate when
It's quite difficult to do in the school context.
the relation stops. Yeah. Okay, that's a very common picture, as I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear. I mean, in terms of what we mean by evaluation, so there's two things there. Has it met its intended aims? And can it better meet those intended aims? So there's kind of summative and formative thing there. It's not just a justification for the CPD budget. I think quite often it's seen as a kind of the role of the CPD leader to kind of validate their role, validate the money that's spent on it with very specific and clear outcomes. Maybe that comes into this one, but crucially it should also be informing you how the learning is changing, of how staff's learning is changing and how pupils' learning is changing. And that process is developmental in itself. So it's a really, really important part of effective CPD in checking that it's working in the best way possible. I think, again, evaluations, often it's felt as kind of, oh, I'm filling in this form so I can help out my colleague, the CPD leader. And that is only part of evaluation. We're going to quite often talk about evaluation at a macro level across the school. How is the CPD program generally working? And then at a micro level, in that I've decided to work on an aspect of my practice. I've had some form of development, whether that's I've just gone and read a blog, whether that's I've gone on a course, whether I've just been chatting with colleagues, whatever that process is, and I need to evaluate how I'm trying that out. Is it making a difference to my learners? And my own professional learning is the process of evaluating the impact of what I'm doing on learners. And I think that's something that can be quite kind of intimidating, and there's lots of talk about research in education at the moment, which is great, but I think it excludes some people who are a bit intimidated and nervous about that. That's something people will be doing anyway. In your classroom, you know, almost all staff will be reflective practitioners. It's just honing those skills and focusing those on a particular issue. So I'm going to be really, really clear that evaluation should be happening at all levels, and it's not just a kind of, has it worked? It's the actual learning process itself of how it's worked. Does that make sense? It's not about generalisable knowledge. So the other thing that we get quite or some individuals get quite hung up on is, like, can we know that this has the effect? It is exceptionally difficult to do generalisable, to research for something that can be generalised in all schools or all contexts in education. Where we've looked at big randomised control trials, a lot of them have come out pretty inconclusive because there are so many complicated factors in a school. So when I've tried something out in my classroom and I'm evaluating it, it's not to say that it would work in every class at every time of day in every school in the country. It's looking for indicators that show that it's working, having a positive effect. Similarly, if I'm looking at something in my classroom and I try it out and it has a positive effect, but there might be a number of factors that have contributed to that, that doesn't make my finding invalid. It just limits the conclusions I can draw from it. So I've tried something out, it seems to be positive. That doesn't mean that I'm saying that I found a cause and effect and that everybody should be doing it. And that's okay. I think we need to kind of set a limit on what we're expecting from our evaluation. It needs to be contextualised. We're not talking about effect sizes and things that can be applied elsewhere. We're just looking at a range of indicators that can inform us as best as possible. And it needs to be sustained over time. So similarly, if you're looking at a whole school process, there are some things that are easier to evaluate. So if you have done very little indeed on literacy, and then you have a big 2-year programme that looks at a range of things, and you've done a pre-test of reading ages and a post-test of reading ages, and you can see a significant change, you can probably conclude that the whole programme was helpful. That in itself won't tell you what worked best or which aspects of it are most powerful. That's when you need to use other forms of evaluation in a sustained way as you're going along. And in fact, if you haven't done any evaluation in between those 2 years, if it had started to go wrong, you would have missed it and it could have been a wasted period of time. So it's about accepting or using a range of different indicators. It's not about kind of hard and fast research. Does that make sense? This is a really, really important point. Often, and I did this as a teacher, and I think school leaders do it quite a lot. You go to an event like this, or you go on Twitter and you hear about a fantastic idea, and it's got a good research base behind it, so you run with it as soon as you possibly can. Then after a period of time, you go, oh, I better evaluate this. If you're not clear on what need you're addressing and what your starting point is, it's going to be almost impossible to do a good evaluation. So needs analysis and evaluation have to come hand in hand. And that's the same at teacher level as it is at school level. So as an individual teacher, if I notice that there's a particular group of students who are not performing as highly as others, and I want to really explore how I can better meet those needs, that's going to be the same as looking at a school level and saying, okay, in general, we're not reaching, boys aren't achieving as highly as girls, so we need to look at this issue. We know what the issue is. When we can describe what success would look like, which does tend to be easier at school level, boys aren't underachieving, boys and girls are achieving equally highly. And at individual teacher level, it should be something really specific around, I want to focus on these students' use of vocabulary or something specific where you can say, and if it worked, this is what it would look like. That needs analysis process, that description of what success would look like, then makes evaluation much, much easier, because you can say straight away, this is what it should look like, has it got there? Where has it not got there? How can I adapt and improve it? So don't even think about evaluation if you haven't got a kind of needs analysis there. And what often happens at schools is that at a whole school level there's quite a lot of needs analysis, but at an individual teacher level they're not necessarily thinking about what need they're addressing before they start CPD, and that's something that should be kind of built into it. Does that make sense so far? Okay, so these, Thomas Guskey is the kind of guru around evaluating CPD, and these 5 levels are really, really important. So the first one is participant reaction. How well is the process being designed or delivered? And it's done normally immediately afterwards. Participant learning is, have I gained some kind of new knowledge or skill? And that helps you improve the content. Is this actually making a difference to teachers? The third one is one that Gus particularly added in, which is organisation support. So I'm sure this will be a very familiar picture to you, where you come across an idea, or a speaker comes into school, everyone's really excited, it's really well delivered, came away with loads of ideas, and then there is no time provided for you to try it out, to come back and talk about it again, to work together as a department to apply it in a subject context. So without that kind of facilitation at an organisation level, individuals' learning will kind of not be taken forward. So it was well delivered, I learned something new. Has it actually made a difference to my practice? Have I been able to implement it? You know, this is the kind of thing you can see through observations. Is there a different practice happening? And only then can we expect any change in pupil outcome. Quite often we think about, are people satisfied with the initial experience? Has it made a difference to pupil outcomes? But actually, all of those levels need to be considered and need to be implemented and thought about. So, I think there's a few things about this. It's pretty much easiest to evaluate this, and it gets more and more difficult to evaluate as you go down. This feels like it's the most important. So the hardest thing to evaluate is also the most important. But crucially, all of these rely on each other. If a session is really poorly delivered, you won't learn anything new, you won't change your practice, and you can't expect an impact on pupil outcomes. Similarly, if you really great session, you learn something new, but there's no time provided for you to think about it, to plan, to collaborate, therefore you don't actually change your practice, so you don't make any changes. Even though you've learned something new, you don't have a chance to implement it. It won't have an impact on pupil outcomes. Also, you might get great CPD, you might have learnt loads, you've got loads of time to put it into practice, you try it out, it might not work. And that's actually when that process of evaluating, is this working as it should? You know, research suggests this should work for my context. Has it worked for these pupils? Why is it not quite working? What can I adapt? What can I refine? And that is not a kind of, you know, something that has a strong research base should be contextualized and refined for your context. I think there's often an expectation that I've told teachers good practice. If I see them doing it, that means that it will work for pupils. And of course that's not the case. It's so complicated, as I'm sure appreciates the quiet. It's so complicated to look at people learning and underpin what supports it and what makes it work. Finally, I think there's been a kind of a real anti-happy sheets. Like, I don't want to look at forms. Doesn't matter whether they like the lunch or not. I'm really interested in this time. I'm really going to focus on student learning outcomes. It's really, really important to consider all of these levels because they each rely on the level that came before it. So it's not enough to just say I'm going to dismiss the initial reaction, because if that's poor, that tells us that we can't expect the next few levels. Finally, just to think about that needs analysis aspect as well. So there are plenty of aspects of CPD where we're not looking at a direct impact on student learning outcomes. So, for example, well, something quite simple like beginning of the year, we may, depending on the culture of the context of the school, quite often people want to spend the first inset day just getting everybody inspired and excited to be there and motivating people for the beginning of the year. It is perfectly legitimate to say, I just want to spend some time motivating my staff. I'm not expecting a direct impact on students. So I'm not going to bother evaluating anywhere near beyond, was that a useful and exciting session? First aid training, which hopefully you're unlikely to use very often, you're probably just going to make sure that it's well delivered and that people have changed their understanding and their learning. You're not going to look to see whether they're using it, because obviously it's going to be something that only comes up at appropriate times. Changes in specification and exam changes that we've had recently, that's not going to have a direct impact on student learning. Of course, it changes what we teach. Of course, it influences students, but we're not looking for a change in pupil outcomes there. We're just trying to make sure that teachers' understanding has changed and that the way that they're using it and applying it in their classroom has changed. So I think, again, we've talked more about evaluation, we're kind of rejecting the happy sheets, but we risk going for, I want to see an impact on students for absolutely everything that we do, and that's not always appropriate. So it's balancing where all of these levels are, and actually, are we trying to impact on student outcomes? Doesn't mean that we're doing something that doesn't benefit pupils. Obviously, it's beneficial for pupils to be learning the correct curriculum, but we can't say that getting to grips with the exam board is going to have a direct impact on pupil outcomes. So I've kind of talked quite a lot around those levels. I just wanted to take a few minutes to see if you had any questions or any reflections. Yeah.
I do have one.
Yeah.
And I quite like this, actually, it's hugely useful. But we have a thing now, whether it's right or wrong, quite a lot of our CPD is delivered by colleagues. So we have colleagues who are good at things delivering CPD in-house.
Yeah.
Which leads to a bit of an issue, because I know, having seen A, the delivery, and then B, some of the feedback sheets afterwards, that the first one, the participant reaction, people are tremendously reluctant to be honest when things aren't good, when it's one of their colleagues. Is there any established way past that? Because I know we have people who go, oh, it's brilliant, because they're worried that if they say it's not very good, the person who delivered it is going to get it. When that, and I can see why they do it, but is there any established way around it?
Yeah, the thing about participant reaction is I've kind of been saying don't get rid of all the happy sheets, don't throw them baby out with the bathwater. But there is just questionnaire fatigue, and when you give people the questionnaire, particularly at the end of the day, at the end of the session where they've already had to stay late, for example, it's just going to be like, yeah, good. So there are other ways of doing it which I think could be a more open environment for not necessarily direct criticism, but at least suggestions of what would have made it better. So things like focus groups, informal feedback with a few key people, but realistically, in terms of how well it was delivered and structured as a session, you probably don't need everybody's opinion on that. It might not be as relevant for different people. That might be a more useful thing to say, like, how relevant was this for you across the whole staff? But just, was it well delivered? And, did you feel that it was a well-structured session? Probably a few people could tell you that. So where you've got more open relationships, or where it's just a kind of informal conversation, that probably will tell you all that you need to know, and that might get round it. Does that help?
Yeah, no, it does, thank you.
I think if you anonymise things, right, the last thing you want to do is put your name on it. If you've just slag somebody off basically. So
Yeah.
we always go, our stuff's always anonymous. It's asking the right questions as well, isn't it? Because if you just say, was it delivered well, that's not a very, it's a kind of yes or no answer. If you've got and the sliding scale thing, people tend to go to the middle.
Yeah.
If they're not satisfied.
Yeah, don't know.
Yeah. So it's about making sure you understand what you're asking other people, I think, when you do it in a related sheet as possible.
I've done a number of sessions with some primary schools lately where I've been trying to take the format that they use with youngsters with their self-evaluations in class. So it makes, because I've been around a long time, I don't think people are very honest, and they need to say, you know, actually, Aaron, that wasn't any good, or that didn't give us what he wanted to do. But they tend to say, oh, it was lovely to see you again. It's not helpful to me or to them. So I've started using, to make it less personal, you know, what was good about this session for you, and even better if. And that's the bit that really helps me more than anything. People that seem to be being a bit more honest in that way. So, I don't know, think about it. It's back to your point really, it's the question you ask and how you ask the question.
It might be worth asking the presenter themselves what they thought of their own session, because we're quite good at self-evaluating our own lessons. You know, 9 times out of 10, the person that's watching your lesson will have the same opinion as you about how well your lesson went. And it's the same
true. That's very true. Another thing about this is the timing as well. We tend to talk about initial feedback and then maybe student outcome quite a long way away. Whereas what you really want to be thinking about is kind of initial participant learning, and then has that, you know, is that being thought about in a month's time? And I know things like Blue Sky or different equivalent online systems often have a kind of prompt where it comes up again and says, you said you were going to do this, have you done that a month later, 3 months later? That can be really useful. It can also just be another thing to fill in that people get really frustrated by. So I think it's a balance of making sure that where people are focusing on one key thing over the year, that's probably quite appropriate. It's probably not appropriate for absolutely everything that people are reflecting on and doing. In fact, that's quite an important point in terms of how you're structuring your CPD across a year, or the amount of CPD you experience across a year. To really make a difference on student learning outcomes, you need to focus on quite a specific aspect for at least 2 terms. So in your appraisal, if you're saying the one thing that I really, really want to look at is this kind of specific aspect of the curriculum, then you should be evaluating all the way down to student learning outcomes. But if you also have a kind of, someone mentions some idea in a 15-minute sharing forum that you decide to take forward, or if we have a celebrating session with the marketplace where you can hear what different colleagues are doing, that helps you with a few different classes, and it gives you some ideas, and that's developmental, but it's not going to be worth going through all this evaluating. It's okay to pick and choose what you evaluate and what you evaluate to what level as well. Any more questions or thoughts about this?
If you did it as a whole, because you obviously have like whole school CPD, don't you, where you inflict your desires on every single person in the school. But then you also, or most schools have some more reasonably tailored to individuals. Would it be legitimate for some of the whole school stuff to actually get heads of department to evaluate it? In terms of, rather than pestering every single person in the school to go, what did you get, is more, what did your department get from?
I mean, I'd be interested in what the rest of you think, but I certainly think so. Particularly where, I don't know if you can think of an example of something you've done at a whole school level, but sometimes, let's say that there's a whole school focus on, okay, we have a real literacy issue in schools, so we're going to try and look at literacy across the curriculum. And that's kind of a general school agenda. But within that, so you've got 3 priorities and that's one of them. So everybody gets something on literacy across the curriculum, but other staff are going to be focusing on other aspects of their practice a bit more that year. So it's just kind of one strand of something that they're thinking about. And actually at that kind of level, that probably is more appropriate for the department lead to say, yeah, this person is really, really working on it and it's got some really detailed evaluation, but in general this is the change in practice that I'm seeing, this is what staff are feeding back, you know, these are the kind of changes that are happening rather than asking everybody to evaluate on something that might only be a smaller part of their CPD for that year. I don't know if people agree with that. So, let's not do it in tables, obviously, because there aren't that many of us. I just want to spend a little time thinking about each level. Just what do you think would be a good, rather than kind of what you would evaluate, what kind of tools could you use to evaluate for each of these? So we talked about the participant reaction, where you can do it online, or you can do it on paper, or you can do kind of a focus group. But if we wanted to look at whether people had learned something new, what kind of thing would you use to evaluate that, or could you use to evaluate that? Any thoughts?
Sorry, I sort of was half writing.
That's okay.
No, sorry.
So I'm just thinking, like, how would you evaluate whether somebody has learned something new?
You can ask them how they might use it in their practice, to inform their practice.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get a way forward, I suppose, for an individual, rather than just saying was it good.
Yeah.
Disseminate some information to somebody else.
Yeah, share, like, I think sharing and evaluating often get confused, and people say, oh yeah, I went on a course and then I came back and shared it. That doesn't necessarily evaluate whether it's had an impact at all of these levels, but it will tell you whether they've learned something new that they can then share, absolutely. I mean, I've been to, so there's one school that we work with who has a very interesting CPD programme, and they have it's quite kind of intellectualised, and they have about 4 different groups who are focusing on particular areas of research. And in that area of research, you might do like a self-knowledge, you know, a kind of self-audit, this is what I'm confident on, this is what I'm not confident on, and kind of compare that over the year. You might even have like little quizzes and stuff. I don't think that's always appropriate or necessary. I think, as you say, it can be part of the form itself, of like how much has your understanding changed, what have you learned that's new that you might take forward. And then it's going back to that to see whether that's been remembered. Organisation support and challenge. Like, how well is the organisation supporting the staff? And this is something that you kind of want to get an overall view of. How would you go about measuring that or evaluating that? Do you know if the school, if either of your schools do something like that at the moment?
I don't know if we evaluate it. I think it's a bit more ad hoc.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect.
Yeah, so.
I think if you, just from anecdotal evidence, if I, for example, needed a particular bit of CPD, I know that I can go and sit and talk to the head, and if I had a good reason, he would facilitate it. If he thought it would then have a positive outcome on the students later on, or myself, or
Yeah.
so I know that if you've got a good reason, then the organisation will support you, but I don't know whether they evaluate
How they
They
do.
probably not, I suspect.
I mean, it kind of, lots of schools do whole school CPD surveys at the end of the year, which lots of it gets fit back informally as well, either by people asking for particular support, or middle leaders often feedback on that a lot, like actually this idea didn't get taken forward because, you know, this huge change in curriculum happened at the same time, so we've been able to focus on it or whatever. That's something that as a charity we help schools with. We kind of do a big CPD audit, which is basically looking at, are your processes set up to help the school work in the best possible way?
We would call, we do all our CPD needs, if you like, recorded on SIMS when we do appraisal. So you could go and do a SIMS kind of report on the outcomes of appraisal, I suspect.
Yeah, and I think that's quite an important one to include in appraisal. It's not just like, have you met your targets or not, but also what stopped you, what should we be looking at next year structurally that has been a problem for people this year. That's very true.
I think some the wider group of schools I work with, I'd have a better idea of being able to evaluate whether that's likely to happen based on what the school is able to tell me about how their process is set up to actually have formal, written in, if not timetabled, written in time within staff meetings or within planning time or within the structure of the individual staff's timetable that allows them to do private study, follow up on stuff they've done, and some schools are much better at being able to show me that they have that structure than others. Others will just say, oh yeah, we'll make some time available, and I don't have the same confidence that that'll happen.
How about whether participants or teachers in this case are using that new knowledge?
Learning walk.
And where you've got IRS and you might need to self-reflect yourself by using it. And that shouldn't be a kind of, I'm watching to see whether you've done it or not, and it's your fault whether you've done it or not. It's evaluating, okay, so this hasn't had the intended aim, you're not using it, so how can we make it better? How can we help you use it? I'm sure you're aware of that, but that can be how it's interpreted. Finally then, student learning outcomes.
It's quite difficult to relate progress or attainment on one thing you might have changed based on the CPD. So,
I think you're massively, if you do data surveys, you're massively in danger of falling foul of regression to the mean, aren't you? Because you'll go, oh, I want to improve the thing I'm worst at, and then chances are that regresses towards the mean and gets better anyway. And then you go, oh, that was amazing.
Yeah.
Even though it probably would have happened even if you'd have done nothing at all.
I mean, this is going to go on to next about how everyone is included in the evaluation. The best people to evaluate student learning outcomes are teachers themselves, the students and teachers themselves. And it, obviously, when I say outcomes, performance attainment, but also attitudes, behaviours, skills, those are all things that we want to develop in pupils, and we spend time as part of our professional learning looking at. So, yeah, student learning outcomes, feedback from students, yes, performance, like attainment data, but where you're looking at a really specific focus thing. So I know that things like collaborative inquiry and test study can be focused on really, really specific things for a small group of pupils, and you can look at changes with that. Of course, you can't rule out other factors that have contributed to that, but you can at least measure those changes. Whereas if you're looking at literacy, or even like reading ages, there's so many skills that contribute to that, but that's a very complicated picture to unpick, and that can only really give you trends, and you're going to look at that over time. Whereas teachers can give you that kind of formative, this is how the pupils responded, this is the change I've seen in their work today, this is how confident they were in lessons, that kind of thing. So here's some examples. Participant satisfaction, surveys, informal feedback, focus groups, post-it notes. Participant learning, all the same surveys over time as well. Also self-evaluations, conversations and performance management we didn't really talk about. Reflective journals. Organisational support, again, can be focus groups, and middle leaders, as I say, can be quite good, helpful for that. Our own TPD audit, informal feedback, appraisal, surveys. Observations and video are most helpful. Student feedback as well, in terms of whether they've noticed change in practice. But also line management meetings, team meetings, sharing how people are using it or if they're using it. And student outcomes, again, we talk about these pupil interviews, pupil work, various different forms of data, collaborative inquiry and action research are the most powerful for this. And it should be at a micro and a macro level. So, right, including staff. So we're looking at, has the CPD met its aims, and how can it better meet those aims? Senior leadership are in the kind of the worst position, that's what I said, the worst position for answering that. Middle leaders have a better overview. Teachers and support staff have the largest quantity of data available to them and the most practitioner knowledge. It's about trusting the professionalism of those practitioners because they are the ones working most closely with pupils. Of course, as SLT, you can look at broad school trends, but really, particularly for this formative one about how it can better meet those needs, it's individual staff who are best placed to do that. Not only that, when you're filling in a form that is going to somebody else to consider, you're not very motivated to do it because it doesn't necessarily feel like it's going to impact you. You don't necessarily trust an evaluation that somebody else has done, but kind of trust one that you've taken part in. And evaluation itself is the learning. This isn't meant to be an additional thing that we're adding on to CPD to make your life a bit more awkward. It's something that you do whenever you learn something new. You should be reflecting and evaluating how has that had the impact, has it been successful? And that is the skill of a good practitioner anyway. And within that, we would expect more experienced teachers to be a bit more skilled at that than beginning teachers, for example. So particularly with people early in their career, you might spend more time looking at that skill of evaluating. But it is being a good practitioner. It's not an additional thing that I demand to your workload. And I've just added these examples on because people, particularly around those softer skills, often want to have kind of ideas for what we mean by evaluation and that kind of formative assessment. So, looking at really specific outcomes. So, how are they using that tense and model language? What kind of vocabulary, what key terms are they using? Something that you can actually really measure. Standardised tests, particularly when focused on a specific area, can be helpful. Comparing pre and post work, looking at, like, even just kind of comparing quantity of work completed in the lesson, that kind of thing. Comparing to other year groups or similar classes. And that softer skill around that resilience and confidence and independence, that's often things that people want to look at in their professional learning, but they get really stuck on how to measure it. It's about unpicking at the very beginning, right, I decided that there's a need in terms of resilience in my classroom. What would a resilient child look like? Well, they wouldn't put their hand up, well, depending on how you want to define it. I'm going to suggest they wouldn't put their hand up to ask for help very much. They would, be much more skilled at looking things up for themselves. They would use a textbook, speak to their peers. They would take a long time for them to give up. Those kind of measures, when pushed, people have that in their head, but they don't necessarily think all of that through, which then makes evaluation more difficult. Obviously, people think that's really important. Similarly for confidence, how much time, how long does it take them to start work? How much are they answering questions? How much are they volunteering information? Where somebody's observing, they can particularly focus on pupils and give you that informal feedback of, I'd say they were I saw them a week ago and I would have given them a very low score out of 5. This time I'd give them a higher score because they asked more questions, they seemed more confident and happy. Similarly, engagement. The power of having somebody else in your classroom who's just able to tell you, by the way, these pupils were off task at this point, this many times. Not at all a judgment or a loaded thing, it is helping you to understand your classroom better. Because as one person with 32 people, you cannot possibly see that on your own, and that's what observation should really be used for. It's helping you see what you can't normally see. So when putting together a CPD programme or when approaching an opportunity for your own professional learning, it's worth considering, what am I hoping to get out of this? What need am I addressing? And I know that often CPD comes at the end of the day, and I've done so many sessions where people turned up and asked what they're hoping for, and it's a bit kind of, I'm just here because I was sort of told to, and I haven't really thought about how I'm going to use this. And where that happens, you need to then take the time to think, okay, so what's the need that I'm addressing? What would it look like if this really, really worked? And it shouldn't just be, I'm going to walk away cheerful when I go home today with some ideas. Where we want to see pupil impact, it should be these particular pupils will start doing this or stop doing this. And that process before and during the professional learning will make the evaluation afterwards so much more powerful. So, to sum up, evaluation is not about generalisable knowledge, it's summative and formative. So yes, we want to know which things are working well and having an impact, but we also want to know how to improve them and how to make sure they're having a stronger impact. You cannot evaluate if you don't know what need you're addressing. Each of the 5 levels should be considered in both the needs analysis and the evaluation. So what am I trying to do? Okay, so what's worth evaluating? The process of evaluating what you're trying out in your classroom is good practice as a teacher, and it is professional learning. So that should be taking place at a micro level in each classroom, and then that can be aggregated at department level and at school level, and it should be considered at both of those levels. And that's it. And obviously it's 1:45, and I know that you have to, some people have to rush off. If anyone has any questions or anything about that, because I'm not going to rush through the last bit particularly. No, don't worry at all.
There's a lot of food for thought there.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You make the slideshow able to link so we can...
Yeah, I think he has it already. I
Okay.
think he's sharing it around. Yeah.
The table will be useful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I'd recommend
Just one.
discuss this well.
It would be good if he took those things into account when he decided how he'd like it today.
Well, that's another thing actually, is often evaluation happens at like the senior leadership level.
Yeah.
And often actually, these things have been at least thought about and sometimes planned for. That kind of needs to be explicitly communicated for people to buy into to why they're doing it. Because I think that often with evaluation there's a bit of resentment that you're just helping somebody else's work rather than how it feedback and benefits you. Or maybe that's just being honest. I don't know.
We ran this sort of day last year. It was well received, I think, which is why he's gone ahead and done a similar thing, obviously different events.
Yeah.